This preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations, I call natural selection. Natural selection rendered evolution scientifically intelligible. It was this, more than anything else, which convinced professional biologists like Sir Joseph Hooker, T.H. Huxley, and Ernst Haeckel. Nevertheless, it is probable that the hearing rather early in life such views maintained and praised may have favored my upholding them under a different form in my Origin of Species. This preservation of favorable individual differences and variations, and the destruction of those which are injurious, I have called natural selection, or the survival of the fittest. If any man wants to gain a good opinion of his fellow men, he ought to do what I am doing, pester them with letters. Man in his arrogance thinks himself a great work, worthy of the interposition of a deity, more humble, and I believe truer, to consider him created from animals. Sexual selection acts in a less rigorous manner than natural selection. The latter produces its effects by life or death at all ages of the more or less successful individuals. Unusual degree. This family became divided 8 generations. Sexual selection will also be largely dominated by natural selection, tending towards the general welfare of the species. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. I am dying by inches from not having anybody to talk to about insects. The power to charm the female has sometimes been more important than the power to conquer other males in battle. 2 distinct elements are included under the term inheritance: the transmission and the development of characters. And thus, the forms of life throughout the universe become divided into groups subordinate to groups. I think an agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. The whole subject of God is beyond the scope of man's intellect. I hope that I may be excused for entering on these personal details, as I give them to show that I have not been hasty in coming to a decision. What an extraordinary thing it is! Mr. Darwin seems to spend hours in cracking a horsewhip in his room, for I often hear the crack when I pass under his windows. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare, and found it so intolerably dull that it nauseated me. I have deeply regretted that I did not proceed far enough at least to understand something of the great leading principles of mathematics, for men thus endowed seem to have an extra sense. But I am very poorly today, very stupid. I hate everybody, everything. One lives only to make blunders. Whilst man, however well behaved, at best is but a monkey shaved. Origin of man now proved, metaphysics must flourish. He who understands baboon would do more towards metaphysics than Locke. It is no valid objection that science as yet throws no light on the far higher problem of the essence or origin of life. Who can explain what is the essence of the attraction of gravity? I am convinced that natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of modification. When I view all beings not as special creations, but as the lineal descendants of some few beings which lived long before the first bed of the Cambrian system was deposited, they seem to me to become ennobled. He used to say that Unitarianism was a featherbed to catch a falling Christian. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. In regard to the amount of difference between the races, we must make some allowance for our nice powers of discrimination gained by a long habit of observing ourselves. One may say there is a force like 100,000 wedges. Or she may accept, as appearances would sometimes lead us to believe, not the male which is the most attractive to her, but the one which is the least distasteful. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. How odd it is that anyone should not see that all observation must be for or against some view if it is to be of any service. The expression often used by Mr. Herbert Spencer of the survival of the fittest is more accurate, and is sometimes equally convenient. Our descent, then, is the origin of our evil passions. The devil under the form of baboon is our grandfather. I have stated that in the 13 species of ground finches, a nearly perfect gradation may be traced, from a beak extraordinarily thick to one so fine that it may be compared to that of a warbler. I have always maintained that, excepting fools, men did not differ much in intellect, only in zeal and hard work, and I still think there is an eminently important difference. Such simple instincts as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. It is necessary to look forward to a harvest, however distant that may be, when some fruit will be reaped, some good effected. What wretched doings come from the ardor of fame, the love of truth alone would never make one man attack another bitterly. Englishmen rarely cry, except under the pressure of the acutest grief, whereas in some parts of the continent the men shed tears much more readily and freely. A grain in the balance will determine which individual shall live and which shall die, which variety or species shall increase in number, and which shall decrease, or finally become extinct. But a plant on the edge of a desert is said to struggle for life against the drought, though more properly it should be said to be dependent upon the moisture. The limit of man's knowledge in any subject possesses a high interest which is perhaps increased by its close neighborhood to the realms of imagination. It is difficult to believe in the dreadful but quiet war lurking just below the serene facade of nature. One hand has surely worked throughout the universe. Often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may have not devoted myself to a fantasy. In conclusion, it appears that nothing can be more improving to a young naturalist than a journey in distant countries. He who understands baboons would do more towards metaphysics than Locke.